What's up, people? Today I want to talk about how to build an emergency fund and why to build one and when to build one and what the experts say. So, generally, all the experts agree that if you have a steady job, you probably need about 3 to 6 months of living expenses saved up in an emergency fund that you basically don't touch ever. And all the money needs to be liquid, not invested, so that you could pull it out at any time. Because if that emergency comes, you really need the money right then. You don't want to have to sell stocks or bonds or whatever else you're currently invested in. Now, I don't really follow this advice because I have a lot of debts to pay off and I would like to cut it a little closer to the edge. But the experts agree that you should be building an emergency fund before paying off your debts. For me, that really wasn't reasonable at the time because if you're paying hundreds of dollars in interest every month, that money is probably better spent paying off the debt and then having an emergency fund built at a way faster rate. So for me, paying off debt, especially if you can use that same money as a semi-emergency fund. So if you have a credit line at a bank, for example, that is reasonable to use as an emergency fund, then I think it kind of counts. Obviously, you shouldn't be relying on that long term, but short term, paying off high interest debt is in your best interest, and I think in some cases should be prioritized over building an emergency fund. The problem is you don't really know when because you're not counting on having an emergency at any point, right? So there's a lot of things that could happen, like say you get into a car accident that's not your fault. You end up in a hospital for a couple weeks. You might lose your job. Things can go south very quickly without any fault to anyone, except maybe the other driver. But, So you really need to be paying off high interest debt and you really need to also be building an emergency fund. It's just that in my particular case, I would favor paying off high interest debt and then trying to build an emergency fund before paying off the other debt, the lower interest one. But if you're paying 25% interest, like a general credit card in the US, then you're probably paying a lot of money that you could be saving in an emergency fund, and you should obviously be paying that off as fast as possible. So for self-employed and people who work for commissions only and similar jobs, the experts suggest that you have 6 to 12 months saved up as an emergency fund. Now, getting there and starting out is obviously going to be extremely hard. And in that case, I would also go more of a dual strategy of paying off high interest debt while building the emergency fund. I think that if you have 3 months of living expenses saved up, you should be working on getting rid of high interest debt and then going back to building the emergency fund. I don't think that it's in your best interest to work on a 12-month emergency fund while you're at the same time paying hundreds of dollars in interest to, credit card companies or other loans or whatever. So in the first case, try to have like a month of an emergency fund saved up and then pay off most of your high interest debt and then go back to building up the emergency fund some more and paying off the rest, and kind of going the dual strategy there. And in the second case, probably go for about 3 months of living expenses and then pay off the high interest debt and then go back to building the emergency fund. And obviously, you should be doing all this before ever thinking about investing. But again, there's exceptions, and especially in the case where your employer offers a 401k with an employer match, you should probably be taking that free money anyway. Because if you're staying with the employer, you can take a loan from that. And if you're not staying with the employer, if you have an actual emergency and the company fires you, you can cash out the 401k. You pay a ridiculous amount of taxes, but there's a 10% penalty on it, and you pay your normal income taxes. So chances are you're paying 25-30% in interest on that. But in an actual emergency, you probably don't care all that much. And if you get 100% match from your employer, you're still getting free money, even if you have to pull it out at a 25-30% tax rate. So generally, I would say work on getting 1 month of living expenses saved up, get that employer match on your 401k if you can get it, then work on your high interest debt, and then keep building the emergency fund until you comfortably have 3 to 6 months of living expenses saved up, depending on how close to the edge you want to cut it. But generally, don't go for under 3 months of living expenses saved up before you even start about investing in anything other than your 401k.